Okay, let's get going. Good evening. My name is Bob Gardner. I'm on the Mammoth County Board of Supervisors, and welcome to session number 4 of our Citizens Wildfire Academy. Thank you all for joining us. I think we'll have a few more people perhaps join us as we go along, but I'd like to get going. As my kids' band director used to say, early is on time is late. So let's get going for those of you who attended and joined us on time. Tonight, we have a great speaker. Janet Hatfield is joining us. And Janet is it's a real treat to have Janet with us. Let me just tell you, Janet is the Forest Health Program Manager for the Whitebark Institute. She's going to talk about the Eastern Sierra Climate and Communities Resilience Project, which is a plan to engage in forest restoration on approximately 56,000 acres of the Inyo National Forest surrounding the town of Mammoth Lakes. And she'll get into a lot more detail about that. So without any further ado, let me introduce Janet. And Janet, take it away.
Thanks, Bob. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Citizens Wildfire Academy. And thanks to the Eastern Sierra Council of Governments for highlighting this topic. I think it's a really timely and important conversation to be having. And we've lucked out so far this summer, but if you've been around the last few years, you'll understand why we're talking about this now. And I think you'll hear more and more as time goes on. So I have about a 20 to 30 minute presentation for you all. And then we're just really gonna open it up to questions and answers. And this is meant to be exactly what it's called, and that's a learning opportunity for us all. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. And if we can hold questions for the end, that will sort of help me ensure I can get through all the different points that I'm hoping to cover tonight. Okay, Bob, can you see that okay?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. Again, I work for the Whitebark Institute. This is a new organization in the Eastern Sierra that's really risen up to help meet the current challenges that we're all facing with regard to community protection and wildfire resilience. And I work as a primary partner to the Inyo National Forest. This is predominantly on Inyo National Forest land, and with them, I have really no authority to act. As Bob mentioned, this project has a grown-up name that's quite long, but locally, you may have heard it as the Mammoth Donut. So we'll look at some maps and you'll see sort of why it's given that name a little bit later in this presentation. So before I get started, I just wanted to set the stage for what we're going to discuss tonight. And I'm going to start with a contemporary current event, which is looking at the Washburn Fire and understanding why it turned out the way it did, beginning with a little fire science 101. So we're going to keep it light. It won't go above high school level, I promise. And then we'll go into why has it really taken us this long to begin to act on what we have known for quite a while. And we'll discuss sort of an interesting phenomenon that I recently learned about that I think helps explain that well. And then we'll really dive into the project about what we're doing and what the next steps might look like. And then I'll cover very briefly some of the other projects that complement this particular project that I work on, just to raise your awareness that those other projects and programs are also underway. So we're going to talk about the Washburn Fire, which is over near Wawona. I don't know that we got a lot of smoke, at least in Mammoth and Southern Mono County and Inyo County, but I think maybe Northern Mono County got a little, but certainly nothing like we've experienced in summers past. It started July 7th, and as of yesterday, it was just under 5,000 acres, about 35% containment, and it grew by only 35 acres. And so, but what I thought was interesting is that we've spent $16.5 million so far to contain this fire. And we'll might talk about that a little bit too. But before we get into what happened, and I know I'm here to talk about a project I'm working on, but this all will come together. I hope you'll see that. But it's really important that you guys understand the fundamental physical science behind fire. And this is very simple, but there's 3 components that a fire needs to burn. We always have fuel in the forest. Oxygen, thankfully, we typically have. And so we need a heat source, right? That's the ignition source, lightning, an inadvertent human start, etc. And then that's the recipe for a fire. So very basic. But I want to point out that there's only one thing. Well, there's a few things we can have control over here. One, we can prevent ignitions, which we try to do. And the other is we can manage fuels, which is something we can also do. And I think we'll go ahead and leave oxygen alone for now, because I think we'd all like to keep that. And then we'll take that same simple shape and we're going to focus on, again, looking at the fuels and understanding how fire behaves. So we use the same basic shape to investigate the different components that feed into how a fire behaves and why it behaves in the way that it does. And so a lot of that has to do with the topography. If fires burn in a severe canyon that has a lot of influence that slope has, we experience that a lot in the Eastern Sierra, where the winds accelerate down the eastern slope of the range. That has a lot of impact on how fires burn, as does the current weather, right? When it's really hot, particularly really windy here in the east side, we also see rapid fire spread and a resistance to control. And then the fuels in which that fire is burning have a humongous effect, not only on how that fire behaves, but in our ability to contain and control it. So this is really paramount to understanding what happened over at the Washburn Fire and what we're aiming to do here around the town of Mammoth Lakes in the Eastern Sierra. So I want to just keep this in the back of your mind as we go through the rest of the discussion tonight. So July 7th, the fire pops and we have all these early headlines about, oh my gosh, the sequoias, they're in great peril, they're gonna vanish off the face of the earth, you know, really, really drastic headlines. And these are from reputable news sources. And there's some total justification to this, because in the 2020 and 2021 fire seasons, we've lost between 13 and 19% of this tree as a species, and that's really concerning. And so there's a really high level of anxiety about these trees, which are really special and that we care about a lot. And that's totally reasonable and understandable. However, in the days that followed, we really saw a shift in the headlines, and that was a really different story around all of these preventative measures that the Park Service had taken that actually was going to help save the giant sequoias in the Mariposa Grove and maybe even benefit them. And that was like maybe the first time I've seen that really strong language in some pretty major news sources. So that's really great. And we're going to explore why that shift happened. And I think one thing we'll look about, we're going to use that knowledge of the fire behavior triangle and look at why the Mariposa Groves are likely going to be just fine. And that photo underneath is a photo of the Mariposa Grove, and you can see really low fuel loads in there. And that's a direct result of literally decades, nearly 50 years of very active management by the National Park Service. But then outside of the Grove, the fuels look quite different. And this is what makes it really difficult to suppress fires. And that is really heavy fuel loading. That fuel loading is attributed to a number of different factors. It's very easy to blame one of those things, but it's really the culmination of a number of factors that lead into what makes suppression so difficult. So a big factor was legacy impacts of not only logging, but also grazing early in the 20th century and even at the turn of the century. Obviously, you've heard a lot about the effect of the last 120 years of fire suppression that we were very successful at doing for quite some time. And then around this particular area, there's been a pretty significant beetle mortality and a very recent wind throw event, which means a lot of trees were blown over by a real strong mono wind, and those trees have sat on the ground, just accumulating and adding to that fuel load. And then coupled with that, going back to that fire behavior triangle, we've been in a pretty intense drought, making some headlines there, and temperatures across the board are just in general rising, although we have looked at with some pretty mild temperatures up before this week. So these different scenarios and fuel loads have a drastic impact on the fire effects on the ground, as well as the resistance to control. And I lucked out in getting this map yesterday that the Park Service generated, and this really tells the story well. So in the dark kind of gray blue color, those are all of the different prescribed fires that the Park Service has actively managed since, I think the earliest date I saw there was about 1971. And those are really focused here around the Mariposa Grove and the community of Wawona as a very deliberate management strategy to protect those resources. And then you see in the green, these are some wildfire perimeters in past, and then, you know, they're symbolized with the years. So the most recent was 2017. So that's actually considered a very effective fuel break still. And you'll see, and this is not coincidence, that the fire spread is often controlled and held at those old fire scars and or those old prescribed fire. And then I also want to mention here that in the navy blue, this is the biomass removal. This is a hazard fuels project along the road corridors. I think it's currently under litigation in the Park Service right now. And that's helped also the management teams on this fire help contain this fire along that break. Again, reducing those fuel loads, making that a much more successful tactic in containing and controlling that fire. So we're not out of the woods. The red line shows uncontained fire line, which basically means we're not having a party yet, right? It's not over. So, but it's looking pretty good from everything I hear what's going on there. But I think this is really important to see why this was a success story. And then we'll tie that into what we're doing over here. And I just want to, I kind of chuckled. I came across this article when I was researching the Washburn, but this isn't a new thing. It's newer to us because it's kind of raised its head and then been shoved back kind of under the rug for decades, really. And this is a 1956 article about how effective these prescribed burns were in reducing the wildfire hazard. And these were some professors from UC Berkeley who were really very influential in the early science and the real movement toward active management of our forests. But it's kind of interesting because we've known this for a long time. The science has been really clear, but it's taken us a really long time to act. And that's always been a real puzzle to a lot of us. And recently I came across an article that I think helped explain it well. And this was a publication around a topic called the shifting baseline syndrome. And this is a global paper. So the authors were out of Japan and the UK. But it really is this psychological and sociological phenomenon where each new human generation accepts as natural or normal the situation in which it was raised. And so I think this slide helps tell that story. In the upper left, that's what forests used to look like in this Yosemite area around Wawona. So I don't know if many of us have walked through a forest like that because we don't have a lot of that left. I might have seen something similar to that one time in a really remote place in the Frank Church Wilderness, but otherwise I haven't seen something like that in my lifetime. And that was the norm of that time. And then the photo below that was the really aggressive logging period throughout the Sierra Nevada, which has left a real bad taste in public's mouth, and rightly so, where we really took much more than was sustainable off the landscape. And then in the upper right, that's kind of what forests look like today. And we think that's normal. And so I thought it was really fascinating because in a nutshell, what it really points to is that not many of us living in the state of California, really in the West, know what a healthy, normal forest really looks like. And so we kind of take it as this is healthy and normal, let's not change it. That's a scary thing. And I think understanding that and the consequences of that is really going to help us in communicating why some of these more proactive management projects are a good idea, but may be hard for us sort of sociologically to turn the corner on. And I think the implications of this are that we have a lack of public will and support for the type of restoration work that's absolutely necessary if we want to be resilient in the coming decades. And I'm going to talk more about resilience, but I want to just let that sit with you, is that a lot of the reason why these projects have not moved forward is because of lack of the public will. And this really is what, so I'm going to shift from sort of a prescribed fire to talk about a thing we call ecological forest restoration. And we'll get into what that is more acutely here, but this is really what the intention of these treatments is meant to do. And I want to just highly emphasize here that the aim of these projects is not wildfire avoidance, because it can't be, because we just saw how important fire is to forests in the Sierra Nevada. So that's not unique to giant sequoia. That is the same fire that the Jeffrey pine and the red fir and the mixed conifer forests around Mammoth Lakes are also dependent on. And there's a lot more science to it. Not all trees are created equal, so each of them have a different need and a different frequency in which they need fire to come through to sort of clean up the forest floor and reduce those fuels and make them resilient. And this is what those treatments look like. This is a picture that I stole from some fires in Southern Oregon. I can't remember if it was last year or the year before, but it shows very clearly what the fire effects were with no treatment, with a thinning only treatment, and then with a thinning treatment plus prescribed fire. So fire moved through this entire system, yet we get very different effects or resilience in the existing stands. And so that's really what the project that I'm working on around Mammoth Lakes is aiming to do, is that center strip here of the thinning and prescribed fire treatments to promote the maximum resilience. And before I get into the actual project specifics, I just want to say we have a great hometown example of what inaction looks like and what the long-term impacts of high severity fire look like. And if you haven't been down to Devil's Postpile in a while, you ought to go down there. But we have a great example of the Rainbow Fire, which burned in 1992. The conditions at the time were about 60-mile-an-hour downdrafts from a thunderstorm. And that fire burned the first 6,000 acres in a single 24-hour shift at very high severity. And you can see very little, if any, overstory survivorship from that fire. So this is what we want to avoid in large patches. It's okay in small patches. It's been existing for millennia on the landscape, but in large patches, it's really devastating. Okay, so that's enough about, you should have a decent, thorough understanding of kind of the importance of fire on the landscape and what resilience is, and that this project is not aimed to keep fire out. It's aimed to make us resilient as both a community and the forests around it that we love and care for, also more resilient in what we expect to be a very challenging next century of climatic stressors in this landscape. So this is a map of the project. It's like Bob mentioned, it's about 56,000 acres. And the colored hatched areas, which are a little bit lighter shades, those are areas that are what we call shovel ready. So those are areas where we can actually begin work anytime that we have funding to do so. And the areas that are the darker shades, so down here in the Reds Meadow Valley, right here in Mammoth Lakes and around the Lakes Basin, and way up here by Dead Man Creek in an area called Three Creeks, we've got funding from CAL FIRE to begin implementing. And in fact, if you've been in Reds Meadow, you'll see that we're about 400 acres into a 500-acre project right now. So the remaining areas that don't have any color are what we're currently planning for and doing the environmental compliance work, so that moving forward, we have the ability to work anywhere within this landscape that we deem is a high priority. So, oh, I just accidentally hit my button there. So you'll start to see that we'll come in and do some more treatments closer to the center of Mammoth Lakes. And then we'll probably keep moving out in somewhat of a mosaic-like pattern to treat different portions of the landscape. And we have like a fairly involved prioritization tool in the works to help us better identify where we want to work next. But the big first goal of this project is to protect the town of Mammoth Lakes. We recognize it has really significant both environmental and economic impacts if a large-scale event would happen in this community that would have tremendous ripple effects up and down the Eastern Sierra, and we want to avoid that. Beyond community protection, you're going to see a lot about resilience, and a big piece in this landscape is really to restore the ecosystem health and resilience, and we'll talk a little bit about what those ecosystem services are. And then the third kind of piece of goal, the goals are kind of categorized in these three topics, is really a lot around the people that are involved in this. So it's creating a fire conscious community, which we hope you're all a part of, and really cultivating these long-term partnerships that help us build local capacity to do this work. And we've assembled some early partners. We've been working for about 2 years now on this project. And there's more partners that are coming in and stepping in to help, and that's a great thing. This is a significant project. It'll likely take between 10 and 20 years to implement, and the goal is to treat about 2,000 acres using this ecological forest restoration. And that's, yeah, we're in it for the long haul, I guess. And then beyond just the community resilience, there's a lot of other benefits to healthy forests, and I think that's why you see this landscape is quite large. Is it recognized that, yeah, okay, we could probably just do a small project to save town proper, but what would Mammoth be if the adjacent forests were wiped out in a high severity event? And I think the answer to that early on was, that's not really something that this community wants or needs. And it's not just about community safety. It's absolutely about water quality and supply to Californians, fish and wildlife habitat, the recreation value, which it's a big reason why a lot of us live here. And that brings a lot of sort of spiritual calmness to all of us in somewhat uncertain times. And then, you know, air quality has been a real challenge. I think it's why we're positioned in the Eastern Sierra. We're positioned kind of in an unfortunate spot. And we have a vested interest in how both the Sierra and Sequoia also manage their lands. So lots of other reasons beyond just community protection to do this project. And this is really what the work looks like. So on the top left, you have kind of what's somewhat current conditions in some of the Jeffrey pine stands around here. And on the top right, that's what we'd like it to be like. So we call those desired conditions. And in order to get there, you follow those arrows. It goes through with thinning out mostly small diameter material. Right now, we're sort of in a position where we don't have a lot of options other than pile it, let those piles dry out, and then burn them in the winter time when the risk is low. And eventually, over time, we can grow forests back into these more desirable conditions with large diameter trees that are much more resilient and resistant to future fires. This is another look at current conditions in another major forest type within this project area. This is looking at red fir. And so this is on the left, kind of what some of the red fir forests look like. And on the right, this is an area that we have treated in years past that's pretty close to what we would consider desired conditions for this species. So again, you see a real shift in the structure of these forests and the density of the trees within them. And the intent behind this is really to change the type of fire we see on the landscape. So I want to recognize these are not the same areas. This isn't even the same fuel type, but I just wanted to demonstrate that high severity uncontrolled wildfire is not something we want to live with. we'd rather accept this mild or more moderate or beneficial fire across the landscape, and we'll be more resilient for that. And that really recognizes, that fire, it's gonna come whether we like it or not. So let's go ahead and prepare for it and make it behave kind of in a manner that we can tolerate and live with. And this is where we are really in our project. So it is a long name, the Eastern Sierra Climate and Communities Resilience Project. We call it for short the ESCCRP, or the donut. And this year, we've burned 340 of the 550 acres so far. That happened in April. And we're about 400 acres into the Reds Meadow project. We should be finishing up in the next 3 weeks or so with the final acres there. And then there is funding for approximately 300 acre prescribed burn. That will be dependent on whether or not we get a weather window that's appropriate for that. And on a dry year like this, that's not a certainty. So this schedule may shift a bit. And then really our big effort is focused on planning so that we can work wherever we need to work in the future years, wherever the need is. The plan for next summer is we're going to address some smaller parcels, but really important right within the Town of Mammoth Lakes boundary at Camp High Sierra, and 2 different parcels that the town owns. So that's on non-federal land. That's a new thing for me and my team. Typically in the Eastern Sierra, you don't get a lot of non-federal project acres. And then there'll be some work around the Shady Rest Campground right behind the Visitor Center. And then all along the Highway 395 median from June Lake to Mammoth, essentially. And then the Forest Service is likely going to be moving forward on a bit of the hazard tree removal in the Inyo craters. So that's next summer. And then in 2024, we have another about 1,300 acres that are slated. Some of that is funded, some is pending a funding award that we're working on now. But you'll see we're really trying to increase what we call the pace and scale of this restoration work across the Inyo within this project area where we have environmental compliance complete. And then we're concurrently working on that environmental planning piece so that we have more flexibility to work where it's needed. And then lastly, there are 2 other parallel projects and programs that I think are worth mentioning. One is the Eastern Sierra Fire Restoration and Maintenance Project that the Inyo National Forest led. And that is pending a decision at present. It has already gone through the scoping process. So you may have commented on that document, but the plan for that is really to allow the reintroduction of prescribed fire, really across much of the Mammoth and the Mono districts. And that allows the Inyo not only to light management ignited fires, but to also manage natural fires, which you see in the Springs fire in the top left photo there. That was a fire in 2019 that the Inyo managed out past Indiana Summit in that natural area, if you're familiar with that. So that's the important piece, because that NEPA document is really the long-term maintenance plan for the project I'm working at, which will thin the fuels out so that we can actually apply fire on the landscape in a safer manner and under sort of a wider prescription window. And then the other program that's worth mentioning is called the Regional Fire and Forest Capacity Program. Whitebark Institute's also heavily involved in leading that effort. And that my project actually fits underneath that program. And there's 2 other projects that are happening right now. There's a project at 40 acres, and they're doing some community wildfire protection planning and vegetation clearing down there. And then the Town of Independence is also undergoing the community wildfire protection planning process. And lastly, we have a small grant to really focus on just defensible space and home hardening education focused around the Town of Mammoth Lakes to complement this project. Because I think the biggest misnomer out there is that this project is going to save the town and you don't have to worry about your defensible space. So I know that I think is the next topic, Bob, for the next Citizens Wildfire Academy, and I cannot underemphasize the importance of defensible space. And the picture you're seeing is our friends in Alpine County in the Tamarack fire in the bottom left there, 2021. You can have the fire rip right past, but if you have good defensible space, you can luck out. You can also not luck out, but again, the two should really work in tandem for maximum resilience for the next few decades here. So with that, there's an opportunity for any other communities. If your community does not have a community wildfire protection plan and you would like to have one, you can contact myself or Holly Alpert at the Whitebark Institute as well, and reach out and we can get you involved. And there's lots of conversations going around that work, and you're invited to come learn more about that and how we can help. And with that, Bob, I will turn it back to you and answer any questions that might be out there.
Thank you, Janet. Lots of good information. And I think for a lot of people who sort of wonder what's happening with your project, this is a great answer to a lot of the questions that are out there. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Let's get to some of the questions. I think there are three. How can we do this best? Maybe I can just read these and we'll go.
I can read them if you'd like, Bob.
Sure, go ahead. That would be great. Thank you, Shireen.
Yeah, so the first one was really just more of a statement. Hello, thank you for taking the time for this presentation. That came from Thomas Duffy. And on behalf of Janet, you're welcome. And then OJ Zelani, what is the procedure to encourage private landowners of Mammoth Lakes lots to reduce fire fuel? They tend to have trees close together with abundant fuel ladders.
Yeah, so it's a tough one on private land for sure. And the answer really is education. And we have, like I said, a small grant. Crystal Medhurst, who is a longtime resident of Mammoth, has been leading that effort in the Mammoth community, working with the fire department and others. And she's getting the word out through the Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network and other social media outlets to try to improve that education. But unfortunately, what I've learned in talking to a lot of other folks that lead similar projects like this across the West is sometimes what motivates a community to really into action is a close call or a catastrophic event. And that's unfortunate, but I have to tell you, during the Creek Fire, I was at Benton Crossing and I have never seen more people dumping yard waste in my life at Benton Crossing. And so that's my point, is we've had some close calls and I think we've seen some activity through those, but we've kind of lucked out. And so I really have talked a lot with the stakeholders early that, like, don't make it be where we have a horrible event to get motivated, because so I live in Swell Meadows, and I think if you've been around a bit, the Round Fire came through about 7 years ago. It wiped out about 40 of my neighbors' homes. A lot of that was, it was just a horrible event. My house was okay in that, but I was home. And so like, I was able to like throw my fire, it was February. So I was able to throw my firewood off the deck and get the sisal doormat away from the front porch, etc. Those are things that like all contribute. And I think you'll learn this next month to how fires burn down. I think there's a really common misunderstanding that fires burn down by like these aggressive lapping flames at the house. And that's not really typically how it happens. It's like a little ember that catches in a straw broom that's by some pine needles in the corner where the pine needles have acquired because the wind has sort of blown them into that corner and you weren't home, right? So like, it's diligence, it's tons of diligence, and having somewhat of a neighborhood network that can help you if you're not home. But it's really hard to instill in people the importance of that. But we do have, we've just hired an outreach and education person that's going to be their sole focus, and they're just getting up to speed on all the things. And so I think you're going to start to see come this winter and into next summer a type of education and outreach that you have not seen in the Eastern Sierra here before. And that hopefully will help. We're going to have all sorts of programs and activities and more things like this so that the word gets out. And we'll be hosting community meetings around those parcels that we're going to treat in town where there's like houses around all of those units to talk about the importance of this work, and hopefully that word spreads a bit like wildfire.
Thank you. All right, next question, David Carl. So you mentioned Dr. Harold Biswell's so many decades ago. For a full history of his and other prescribed burn pioneers, please see my book, Burning Questions, America's Fight with Nature's Fire, published in 2002. The generational effect is very real. This is not new stuff.
Yep. Thanks, Dave. And Jan gave me your book many years ago. So thanks for writing that. And yeah, I was very pleased to come across that shifting baseline syndrome paper, because it finally made a lot of sense to me why it's been so tough for a long time.
We have quite a few more, so just to kind of prepare. Then we have Catherine Buell. Are the community fire protection plans being developed by fire safe councils, i.e. one and the same or two different initiatives?
Mostly they're being led by the fire safe councils with heavy involvement. So yeah, one and the same. It's more of a formalized plan than maybe the fire safe councils have. So hopefully that answers your question.
Then we have Mary Hirsch. Hello, we are in the Lakes Basin. We waited and waited for the fuel to be burned that was stacked into haystacks. Some were burned, only about half of the fuel burned, and the resulting mess is horrible. Is someone coming back to clean up the area? Only part of the stacks were burned. Lots remain to be taken care of. Yep.
So like I said, the process to get this done takes quite a while. That's because once the fuel's cut, it has to cure in order to get better consumption, because there is a practice here on the Inyo where they want us to burn in winter conditions. So the fuels have to dry way out, and then hopefully it's cold, because if in the spring it's a little bit too wet, so the fuels start to get re-wetted again. And I think that's why you saw some partial consumption in some of those. It's very difficult to get prescriptive windows for pile burning. And so what I can say is I hear you. The risk is not significantly reduced until the piles are gone. I'm going to be frank there. But we're really moving, hopefully, away from the pile burn method of getting rid of material. And we have had for the last year and a half a consulting firm that's helping identify different technologies with this project in mind that are going to get away from that, recognizing that we don't have a good history of burning those piles in a timely manner. And so they're not popular, but right now it's the only method that we have to dispose of them. And I'm very hopeful that in short order, we're going to have a lot better answer for you, and you're not going to be seeing as many piles on the ground. But it is the cheapest way, and this work is expensive. And so it will always be in some areas likely a method that's utilized for a while yet. But I don't know what the Forest Service plan is on cleanup, but I know that we are actively seeking this fall for more prescription windows to dispose of the rest of those piles.
Thank you. We have J. Timothy Fives. In 1983, an avalanche knocked down hundreds of large trees on the north-facing slope of the Sherwins above the Mammoth Meadows. I have hiked through there recently and been impressed by the tangle of broken, shattered, and semi-rotting trees. It is a huge concentration of fuel. How does this area figure in your plans to reduce fire hazards?
Great question. We have a very similar instance right now down in Reds Meadow where we're actively working. It wasn't an avalanche, but it was wind throw. Again, similar to over in Wawona. And what we do is we have a special specification within the contract for the timber operator that comes, and that they basically cut up, we call it bucking up, and pile those down woody debris pieces. So in those instances, they will basically cut it up into small enough piles where they can stack it. So if it's up in a remote area, that's where we might use piles. We may also opt for helicopter operations to fly stuff out. I don't know yet. We're working on sort of the nuts and bolts of the operation. But absolutely in those areas, if there is a deemed threat to some type of particular resource or near human built infrastructure, of course, there will be a concerted effort to clean up that dead and down. That raises the price tag considerably. So that's something that we have to weigh in and manage.
Okay. Then we have Leah Webb, the 3 treatment types. That is a very compelling picture post-fire. However, the August fire complex ripped through all the treatment areas. I might have missed this in your presentation, but have you done a prioritization based on wind directions and geographically where biggest threats might come from? Or how do we look at that bigger picture?
Yep, there is a 3-tiered prioritization framework that is about halfway through development, I would say. So we use the consulting group, the spatial informatics group, to look at tier 1, which we focused again in alignment with the goals and objectives of this project around built infrastructure. And so as you might expect, those 10,000 acres are in very close proximity to the town. Mammoth Mountain ski area along the scenic route as far as access and egress, and then a few power corridors, the geothermal plant, those types of things. Oh, the lakes basin, obviously, for the water supply protection, etc. So yeah, prioritization's a huge thing. They did use the fire modeling to help with that prioritization, and that's going to be a continued piece. So what we do is we use the models, but then we ground truth it with the actual operational personnel. So the fire management officer here on the Inyo weighed in considerably on that framework, and they said, yes, the north and west areas of town, those are the most vulnerable. That's where we want to start. So absolutely, prevailing winds are a big issue, as well as slope. So it goes back to that fire triangle, as where is the fuels, weather, and topography line up, and then where is your probability of ignition highest. So with that, for us, is likely where we have high concentrations of recreation users. But as risky to the town, burning the forest down, the town is also like a house fire on a windy day could also spread to the forest as readily. So we have a lot of risk in this area because there's such a high concentration of people.
All right, then we have Catherine Buell. Are there any programs that will help private homeowners to harden their homes? Grants for enclosing soffits, removing understory, replacing shake roofs?
So I think the answer to that is not yet, but the goal is that we might be able to get there for sure, because we recognize it's a hardship for a lot of folks out there, and that's not lost on us. As you might imagine, we have to sort of divide and conquer in these things. So I'm really taking the role of the forestry related work, and then we're bringing in sort of a counterpart to me to help really hammer home on the defensible space home hardening, and working with the fire department to figure out what those programs look like, because we're going to need them not only in Mammoth, but up and down the Eastern Sierra. So we work really closely with CAL FIRE, and those types of messages are great for us to be able to pass on, because they're open right now to listening about what the needs are, and I think we all recognize that's a real need.
All right. OJ's Lenny, these private landowners are absentee, rarely visit. Does the fire department contact them? As a concerned neighbor, what avenues are there for me to determine who the owner is and contact that person?
Yes, so we actually just had a group of graduate students from UCSB look into this specific issue, because it's an issue not unique to Mammoth, but a lot of the other communities. In that, yeah, I mean, we live here and we're kind of stuck when it's smoky and whatever, and our neighbors can go back home and forget that this is an issue. So there's not an easy answer. The fire department does contact them, and I think they are getting more stringent. And as the state of California ups the ante, the fire department will also follow suit. It is difficult to make anybody do anything at this time, but there is, in other places in the state of California, CAL FIRE is like flying drones over property and taking photographs and sending you a letter that says you have 30 days to do your work. And if you don't do it, you get a fine. So I think, unfortunately, California is probably moving in a more strict direction. And that's largely probably being driven by insurance companies and fire personnel that are tired of paying the recovery fees. And it's not a great answer. So we're really taking the education route at Whitebark and trying to be proactive with that education, and we're going to have to be in close communications with the fire department that has the authority to actually ensure and what's the word I'm looking for? I'm out of I had a little COVID brain fog here.
While you're thinking, Janet, let me jump in here, and
Yeah.
Shireen, you can help me with this. The registered owner of every property in Mono County is public information. Isn't that correct, Shireen?
I'm not, so what it is I'm not sure that you can look anything up and go, oh, there's the registered owner. If you look up, if you were to call my office, let's say as the clerk recorder, and say what's the most recently recorded deed on a property, I'd be able to provide that. So it's not quite as easy as looking anyone up. But I will also say that I believe defensible space is a part of our county code, and therefore you would be able to contact code enforcement in the community development department if you were concerned about a lack of defensible space.
I know that we've worked with the assessor's office, and you can get into their system and find, now it may just be an address, a PO box. We usually don't have emails or necessarily phone numbers, but it is possible to get with an address the legal owner, as you say, who's on the deed. It may be, some description that doesn't give you much information in terms of a name, but it is possible. That is public information, the actual owner, listed owner of every property in Mono County.
Yeah, okay.
What's the
Thank you
word?
for clarifying. Because I wasn't sure if it's that. I mean, like I said, if you find a deed, and there's usually a mailing address there as well.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, it's really common issue is to have neighbors that don't care,
Yeah.
and it's a really difficult thing. But I do think that you're going to see more enforcement over time in this state.
Absolutely. All right, Thomas Duffy said, are there any plans to prepare the June Lake area similar to the Mammoth area?
I hope so. Right now, I've got my hands full in Mammoth, but I think that's where through the Regional Fire and Forest Capacity Program, if we hear from June Lake residents, I know the Forest Service has done some planning efforts around the June Lake Loop as well as the June Mountain Ski Area projects that are both active in that area, but I think there is more work that could be done. And certainly it's been identified within the Mono County Multi-Jurisdictional Hazard Mitigation Plan as a high-risk community. And so I would love to see members of the community of June Lake kind of rise up and say, hey, what about us? Because I absolutely think the work is warranted.
Thank you. And then there's two more, there's a couple of comments. Mary Hirsch said only about half of the pile burns. And then Catherine Buell said there's a layer on the GIS maps that has all the landowners listed, or she said GIA, but I assume she meant GIS, which is good to know because internally I knew that the layer was there, but I wasn't sure if it was available to the public. So if you ever look up Parcel Viewer on the Mono County website, that's something to look into. Oh, GIA is an app. Thank you, Catherine, for verifying.
Okay, yeah.
Got it. And then Mary Hirsch asked, loads of bark beetle trees near Pack Station. Some was chopped and left on the side of the road for quite a long while now. Is someone coming to remove logs? So
yeah, I got a little note about this earlier. So the logs that you're talking about, I know exactly what you're talking about. There's a lot of beetle activity in the Lakes Basin in particular. Those logs were not part of sort of this planning process. Those were deemed a threat to public safety because of the road, and the Forest Service went and cut those logs down. Unfortunately, there wasn't a great plan of what they were going to do with them, so they're sitting on the side of the road. I have heard rumor, because I have asked myself about what the plan is for that, and I hear that they may open that to public firewood, but I will say I was up there the other day and there's people just picking it up, and that's an issue because there's not a great place to pull off there, and I think that's why they don't have a formalized plan yet. But in the future, I think we can work to communicate with them that, hey, let's make a plan and get that stuff off the side of the road, because it's really dangerous to be sitting there. And I agree, it doesn't look great, and it's not great sitting on the side of the road as far as safety goes as well. It's better than falling into the road while you're driving by, but it's not great. And I work with the agency a lot. I can pass that message along.
Great. And then Thomas Duffy said, thank you, Janet. We have thinning going on from SCE on protection of electrical wire caused fires, and most of us around Silver Lake are active in hardening our properties. How can the general public in the Eastern Sierra assist and fund the efforts?
Well, that's a great question. Thanks for that. We are working right now. So this project's big, and I had to chop it like into 7 pieces just so I could think logically about each of the different parts. And so we have a sustainable funding plan and a financial advisory team that I work with that's working on those types of things. And the goal is to create an entity where we can open up via, donate web links and QR codes and whatnot in shops for people to be able to contribute financially if they're able to do that, as well as other ways to get involved. It's so early on, we're just not there yet, but we hope by next year that we'll be able to do that. And that includes, having a thing up at the Mammoth Mountain on the chairlift where visitors can also contribute, and taking that fundraising message to the city of Los Angeles, where most of our visitors come from, because it's gonna be all hands on deck to fund the work that's needed here. It's quite expensive.
Mary said, thank you, Janet. Please stay on top of the haystack issue and beetle bark trees. And then Thomas Duffy, yes, the 501c3 deductible charity would be great for us to assist.
Yep. Thanks, Thomas. We will get the word out as soon as we have it up and running. I appreciate that.
All right, and as of now, there are no additional questions.
Okay, I was going to ask you, Janet, how's the funding going? I think you answered that a little bit. I mean, obviously you're not fully funded, but you have a plan to be fully funded. You want to tell us a little bit more about some of the funds you have received?
Sure. So I think right now I am operating off 4 active grants that are fully funded. That totals a little over $8.5 million. So that's the good news. I have 2 pending proposals that are in. One funds more implementation, so more acres treated, and the other funds a potential workforce development program in cooperation with Saracoso Community College, Inyo County Office of Education, and the Small Business Resource Center, which is a new resource that's coming to Bishop to help with workforce development needs. So a big issue here that's unlike a lot of other places in the Sierra is the Inyo has never really been a industrial timber forest, and that's okay. We're not a very productive forest from a forest management standpoint, which means our trees don't grow that fast because we're high elevation, so we have a short growing season, and it's a drier climate than our west side counterparts. But a challenge of that is we don't have timber operators like they do up on the Plumas and the Tahoe and El Dorado. And that's a real challenge because we're not the only area that's taking on a project like this. And so the competition for contractors to do this work is going to get really tight. And so we're trying to invest in local workforce that can help us get this project done and put more money back into the community. But yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of other payment mechanisms, from insurance people to some Wall Street folks that have interest here to the carbon market folks. Like I definitely deal with a lot of different people who all have a different spin and an interest in this. And then really significantly is the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. I know that's not always an easy relationship when you live here, but they have been really wonderful in their participation in this work, their acknowledgement of the importance of this to them and to Californians as a whole. And they have already contributed the first $1 million to the Inyo for this type of work as sort of a test pilot program to see how it goes. And we're about ready to finish up at the end of this month 2 research papers that look to quantify both the water and the carbon benefits of this work as a potential payment mechanism to also contribute. So we're going to be using state and federal grants, lots of private sector donations, everything from like carbon markets and yeah, there's all sorts of interesting things that are going. There's a group called Blue Forest Conservation that is looking to potentially come in here and help us build what they call a forest resilience bond, where they use some money from big donors and then they find people to pay it back that benefit from the project work. So it's really a multi-pronged approach, and that includes business owners who stand to lose a lot if this community suffers a big loss. And they've all been very supportive. I think it helped because we introduced this project. When we introduced this, you could barely see across the Vaughn's parking lot in Mammoth because the smoke was so thick. And so I think what we're seeing is a real shift in public perception because of some of the really horrific events that we've seen in years past, and sort of the continual bombardment we've had, recognizing this problem's not going to go away unless we step up and act.
That's great. That's great. You know, we say a lot, perhaps I say it too much, but the longest journey starts with a single step. And we can talk about the fact, as you laid out, that it would have been nice if we'd started some of these single steps years ago, but we're taking the single steps now, and we'll be better off, as you say, in 10 to 20 years. And that's all a good thing. So fantastic. Is there another question there, Shireen?
Great presentation, Janet, and great work. Thank you, from Kathy Peterson. Jeannie Okenshot, what kind of support is Altera providing?
Good question, Jeannie. Right now, again, we're pretty early, but Altera has actually been very helpful in that they're providing housing, which we all know is a huge issue, to the timber contractors, as well as some of the cultural resource crews that are doing the needed heritage surveys for some of the additional compliance. So they're very engaged. They attend, they are part of the financial advisory team. They recognize the importance of this work to their operation, as well as their new development plans. And I'm optimistic that we're gonna find a lot of new ways for them to help contribute to completing this project successfully.
And then finally, we have Thomas Duffy. Janet, thank you. Thank you for your efforts. You seem to be taking on the giant as little David. I truly believe that your efforts will begin the process of protecting our forest and private and public property.
I hope so. Yeah, I mean, for a long time, I would drive to town going, when's somebody going to do something, you know? And I really didn't want that person to be me, but here I am. So I just hope we can act quickly so that we have a really good story to tell.
Great. David, did you have another question? I see your hands up.
I don't know if you can hear me. No, I was trying to clap. Usually there's a hand. I was just applauding that last statement. Thank you, Janet.
Okay, great.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Janet. I think we're last call on questions. Fantastic presentation. I think, Janet, you put your email contact in that last slide. Maybe you want to throw that up again, just so everybody sees it in case they want to catch up with you on any further questions.
Sure thing.
While she's doing that, as Janet said, next month, August 15th, the third Monday, remember these sessions are always the third Monday of every month at 6 p.m., August 15th, home hardening and defensible space. And there's already a group working on this, and it's definitely going to be a good session where you can learn, and you can also ask all those questions about what do I do with this, what do I do with that, and how do I get myself in the best possible shape in terms of my own home. So that's a session you don't want to miss. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell everybody you know. We can't max out on the Zoom session, and I really think it'll be a great opportunity. And we'll try to get. We always put out a press release for these. We have been running ads. Thank you to Whitebark. We've been running ads in the sheet. And we'll try to get information out on social media. I think we've already been doing some of that, but spread the word. Again, August 15th, the Monday, third Monday of the month at 6 p.m. So again, thank you, Janet. I appreciate your time, appreciate your presentation. And with that, we'll wrap it up.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot. Have a good evening.